I used to believe that no real devastation could occur over pot roast. That night, the house smelled of rosemary and slow-cooked beef, comforting. Familiar, like the scent of all the Sundays we'd ever shared. I had set the dining room table with my mother's best china and lit the good taper candles, the ones we only brought out for birthdays and holidays. There was no occasion, really just a simple family dinner, but something in my bones had insisted it mattered. Before we dive into all of this, let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. Connecting with viewers across the world is a huge source of inspiration for us. Charleston was slipping into autumn. The sweet scent of tea olives drifted through the open windows, and the leaves on our maple out front had started to turn a rusty red. Walter was in the garden all afternoon, tending to his roses like he always did this time of year, even though the last bloom had long passed. I'd been married to Walter Ellison for 43 years. We'd raised a son, built a home, buried a dog and 2 parents, and somehow in all that living, I had come to believe I knew every corner of our lives, our rhythms, our silences. The way his hand reached for mine in the morning before either of us spoke. But as I poured wine into our glasses and called everyone to the table, I felt watched, like something was about to shift, and I wasn't ready for it. Brian arrived first, my sweet boy, looking exhausted in his usual work shirt and jeans, always polite, always late. Then came Vanessa, his wife of 3 years, wearing a silky green blouse that clung to her frame, her blonde hair swept up in that perfect way she always managed. There was something feline about the way she moved. Elegant, precise. Her smile was sweet, but her eyes were sharp, always watching. "Everything smells divine, Martha," she said, pressing a cool kiss to my cheek. "You've really outdone yourself." "I had the time," I said, returning her smile. "It's been too long since we all sat down together." Walter joined us last, quieter than usual, wearing the navy sweater I'd bought him last Christmas. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his hands were freshly scrubbed, but he didn't meet my eyes. He hadn't for weeks, if I was being honest. I told myself it was the gardening, the fatigue, the season. I lied to myself in small ways to keep the peace. We passed the dishes: roast, potatoes, green beans sautéed in garlic, and for a moment, it almost felt like the kind of meal we used to have before Brian got married, before the distance had crept in. Brian said with his mouth full. "This is incredible, Mom. It's just like you used to make on Sundays." I smiled, but it felt brittle. Some traditions are worth keeping. Vanessa dabbed at her mouth with her linen napkin and tilted her head. "You've always been so devoted to your family, Martha. To Walter. To Brian. It's inspiring, really." The way she said devoted made something behind my ribs clench. There was a lilt in her voice, like the word meant more than what she said. "Thank you, dear," I replied evenly. She set down her fork and placed a hand on her still flat belly, like she wanted us all to look. "I've been thinking a lot about devotion lately," she continued. "About marriage vows, sickness and health, all that." Her voice was soft, but it cut through the room like a knife. "It takes a certain kind of strength to stay committed, through everything." The clink of Walter's fork on his plate was loud enough to make Brian glance up. "That's true," my son said warmly, reaching across the table for Vanessa's hand. "Marriage is about building something together." Vanessa's eyes flicked to me. Or sometimes, it's about sharing what's already been built. My skin went cold. "I have news," she said suddenly, standing with theatrical grace. "Something that will change everything for our family." Brian's face lit up. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant," she announced, beaming. The room erupted in congratulations. The clatter of glasses, the scraping of chairs. Brian jumped up to hug her, his voice thick with joy. "Mom! Dad! You're going to be grandparents!" I should have cried. I should have felt joy. But instead, I watched Vanessa's eyes drift not to Brian, but to Walter. And in that gaze, I saw something dangerous. She came around the table then, leaned down beside me like she was going to embrace me. But instead, she whispered, "I'm pregnant with your husband's baby, you tacky old woman." The world stopped, but I laughed. I don't know where it came from, some deep, ancient place in me that had survived worse, but I laughed. Clear and bright. "Don't worry, dear," I said smoothly, smiling up at her. "Everything will work out just fine." Her face faltered. She hadn't expected calm. She expected a scene. Accusations. Chaos. But as I looked across the table at Walter, my husband of 4 decades, who still wouldn't meet my eyes, I felt the first fracture in the life I thought I understood. And I knew, in my bones, that dinner would never be the same again. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. Sleep didn't come that night. Walter lay beside me, breathing softly in the dark, his back turned like it had been every night for the past month. I stared at the ceiling fan and listened to the old house settle. The floorboards creaked now and then, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked twice before going quiet again. Everything was the same, and nothing was. My mind replayed Vanessa's words on a loop, "I'm pregnant with your husband's baby," until they stopped sounding like words and became something more like static, numb and surreal. But it wasn't just the shock of what she said. It was the calmness in her delivery, the smug little smirk, like she believed she'd won something. But what? And why say it to me? I didn't sleep. I just waited for morning. At 6 o'clock, I rose, padded down to the kitchen, and began the routine I'd performed for most of my adult life. Coffee for 2, eggs over easy for Walter, whole wheat toast, sliced diagonal. It felt ridiculous to do all of it, to pretend this was just another Tuesday. But I needed the rhythm of it, the familiarity. If my hands stayed busy, maybe my mind wouldn't spiral. Walter came down just after 7, dressed in his usual flannel and khakis, his silver hair damp from the shower. He kissed my cheek as he passed, but it felt like a reflex more than affection. "Sleep well?" he asked, opening the newspaper. "Fine." I lead. He nodded and turned the page. I buttered his toast. The silence between us was familiar, but now it was charged. Every clink of the spoon against the coffee mug felt amplified. Every rustle of the newspaper sounded accusatory. I kept catching myself looking at his hands, those same hands that had held mine through childbirth, held our son when he cried, held garden shears in the spring. I couldn't picture them touching her. And yet, after breakfast, he stood slowly and stretched. "I'll be out in the garden," he said. "Need to cut the roses before the frost sets in." "Of course." The garden. I watched from the kitchen window as he stepped onto the dewy grass, moving slowly between rows of faded blooms. He looked older than he had a year ago. His shoulders had started to stoop, and he paused between each bush like he had to catch his breath. The man outside looked like my husband, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't know him anymore. I didn't tell anyone what Vanessa had said. Not yet. Not even my best friend Denise from the women's club, who usually heard every juicy detail in Charleston before lunch was served. This was different. This was my family, my legacy, and if I was going to untangle whatever had taken root here, I needed clarity, not gossip. So, I watched. I paid attention to things I had overlooked before. Small things, odd things. For the first time in months, I started noticing the patterns that didn't fit. 3 months ago, Walter had begun taking more showers mid-afternoon, early evening. It was unlike him. He'd always been a morning shower man. "Don't want to smell like compost," he joked once, drying his hands at the sink after coming in from trimming the azaleas. At the time, I'd laughed. Now it felt like a breadcrumb I had ignored. 2 months ago, I had opened the mail and found a statement from a credit card company I didn't recognize. I'd handed it to Walter. "Did you open a new card?" He'd blinked, then smiled. "Birthday stuff. You'll thank me come December." December was still 4 months away. And then, Vanessa. She had started showing up more often, always during the day, always when Brian was at work. She claimed she wanted to learn family recipes, wanted to get closer to me, but half the time I found her outside chatting with Walter near the roses. She used to scoff at gardening, said dirt under her nails made her feel primitive. Now, she had a vested interest in heirloom tomatoes and mulch composition. I'd come outside with iced tea once and seen her resting a hand lightly on Walter's forearm while he explained something about pruning. Her laugh had been soft, a little breathy, like it was borrowed from some old movie. Walter blushed. I had chalked it up to flattery. A young woman indulging her father-in-law. But now that image gnawed at me like a loose tooth. And then, yesterday, she looked me in the eye and said that awful thing. I needed to know what was true. But not by asking. Not yet. If Vanessa had truly said it just to provoke me, to start drama or test the waters, I wasn't about to play into her hands. I had survived losing my parents young. I had survived financial hardship and breast cancer. I could survive this. Quietly. Intelligently. I started with Walter's study. He'd gone to his weekly doctor's appointment, the same one he'd been attending for months now, though the checkup seemed to coincide more with Vanessa's drop-ins than any medical necessity. While he was gone, I entered the one room in the house I rarely touched. It felt like trespassing. The room was immaculate. Papers in neat stacks. Gardening books lined the shelf. His favorite old leather chair sat angled perfectly toward the window. It smelled like aftershave and time. I opened drawers. Slowly, carefully. Nothing out of the ordinary. Pens, bills, a few photos. And then, in the bottom drawer, tucked beneath a stack of seed catalogs, I found the envelope. Bank statements. Not for our shared account, but for a checking account I'd never seen before. I sat down. My hands trembled as I scanned them. Large deposits, large withdrawals, always in cash, always rounded amounts. 5,000 here, 8,000 there. Where was it going? I snapped photos with my phone, trying to keep my breath steady. I didn't want to believe Walter was funneling money to Vanessa, but what if he was? The sound of a car door outside made me freeze. I crept to the window. Vanessa. Her silver sedan gleamed in the driveway as she stepped out, looking flawless as always. She didn't go to the front door. She headed straight for the back garden. Toward Walter. I stood behind the sheer curtain, watching her approach my husband. Her body language, casual, familiar. They spoke. She touched his arm again. He smiled. A real smile. The kind he used to give me. And something inside me broke. If you're still watching, comment one so I know you're still with me. That afternoon, I didn't speak to Walter. He came back from the garden with dirt under his nails and a smile on his face, humming something soft under his breath like he hadn't done in months. I set the table for dinner, as always, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green peas, and we ate with our usual pleasantries. Nothing sharp, nothing dangerous. Just the polite kind of silence that married couples wear like an old cardigan. But my mind was racing. I had taken pictures of the secret bank account. I had watched Vanessa touch my husband's arm and laugh like she owned the air around her. And I had a growing list of inconsistencies that had turned into something worse. Evidence. Still, I needed more. More than shadows and whispers. I needed something solid. The next morning, when Walter left for another mysterious errand at the garden center, which, to my knowledge, didn't open before 9 a.m., I made my way upstairs to Brian's old bedroom. Vanessa sometimes used it as her guest room when she visited during the day. I knew she kept things there, lotion, scarves, even a little stack of fashion magazines by the window seat. But I wasn't looking for lip balm or perfume. I was looking for proof. I started at the dresser. Top drawers, nothing. Second drawer, just clothes. Then, in the third drawer, beneath a cashmere sweater I knew she didn't pay for, I found a manila envelope. Inside were financial documents, dozens of them, bank statements, credit card applications, loan paperwork, all in Brian's name. The numbers were staggering, withdrawals in the tens of thousands, loan approvals from banks we never used, charges to credit lines I knew he didn't open. My son, who once struggled to manage a college budget, suddenly had more debt than a small business. And I knew, deep down, this wasn't just carelessness. This wasn't just a boy overspending. This was something darker. Someone had orchestrated it. At the bottom of the envelope was a handwritten list, written in Vanessa's graceful, expensive-looking script. Names of banks, dollar amounts. Notes like, Realloc, 2/3, wait 6 days before move, and confirm WW. W? Walter? I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until I heard the front door open. Vanessa's voice floated up the stairs like a violin string pulled too tight. "Martha? I let myself in!" I shoved everything back into place, closed the drawer, and walked into the hallway as calmly as I could. "In the kitchen!" I called, heading down the stairs as if I hadn't just uncovered a bomb in my house. She was already at the table, sipping the tea I hadn't offered her. "I hope you don't mind," she said sweetly. "I wanted to check on the garden again. I'm thinking about planting something when the baby comes. Maybe roses. Or sunflowers." Sunflowers. She didn't even like the outdoors 2 months ago. "That sounds lovely," I said, forcing a smile. Her eyes narrowed. "You seem off. Everything all right?" I sat down across from her. "Just tired." "You've been tired a lot lately." I leaned back slightly. "Pregnancy fatigue is worse, I hear." She flinched. Just a blink. But I saw it. That afternoon, she went out to the garden again. And this time, she didn't go to Walter. She went to Elias. Elias Moreno had been our gardener for about a year. He was soft-spoken, reliable, and always kind. Walter praised his work constantly. I liked him, trusted him. But now? Now I watched from the kitchen window as Vanessa handed him something in envelope. He looked uncomfortable. His shoulders hunched. His hands twitched. He shoved it in his jacket and looked around nervously, like a boy caught stealing from the collection plate. I froze. Was she paying him off? Why? That night, Walter barely ate. He stared at his plate for most of the meal and left the table early. "Long day," he mumbled. As I was clearing the dishes, the phone rang. He answered it, and I watched the color drain from his face as he listened. "Yes," he said quietly. "Tomorrow night. I'll be there." He hung up slowly, staring at the wall like it might speak. "Who was that?" I asked from the sink. "No one important," he said too quickly. "Just someone from the nursery." I said nothing. The next evening, I waited until he left, said it was about lawn fertilizer. It was dark outside. He took the car and his keys, but not the receipt folder he always brought for purchases. I knew he wasn't going to buy grass seed. 20 minutes later, I heard voices in the backyard. I crept to the window. Vanessa. Elias. They were near the garden shed, whispering harshly. Elias looked agitated, waving his hands. She was rigid, arms crossed, saying something fast and sharp. Then a new voice joined. Walter. He had returned, and he didn't see me standing behind the curtain. The three of them were arguing. Vanessa stepped between Walter and Elias like a referee. But it wasn't a mediation. It was control. She was orchestrating something. I stepped outside, as calm as I could manage, and asked, "Is everything all right?" They all turned. Walter's face was pale. Elias looked like he wanted to disappear. Vanessa's expression twisted from surprise to frustration to something colder. "This doesn't concern you," she snapped before catching herself. "I mean just some garden planning." "In the dark?" I asked, stepping closer. Elias shook his head. "Mrs. Ellison, I'm sorry, I can't." "She's manipulating everyone," Walter said suddenly, voice cracking. "Martha, she's blackmailing me." My breath caught. "She has something on Brian," Walter continued. "She knows about his gambling. She's been using it to control me. I pretended to have an affair, to protect him, to buy us time." I turned to Vanessa. "Why?" Her mask was gone. The sweet daughter-in-law act vanished. "Because power," she said flatly. "Because I could. And because it was easier to be the puppet master than the discarded wife." Elias stepped forward. "The baby's not Brian's," he said quietly. My knees gave. I held on to the porch railing. "It's mine," he continued. "She told me it was just a mistake, that she'd handle it. But then, she gave me money, told me to keep quiet. I couldn't anymore. I couldn't lie for her." Vanessa glared at him. "You coward." But Elias didn't flinch. "Brian deserves better. They all do." And suddenly, everything made sense. The money, the envelopes, the garden visits, the lies. I looked at Walter, his eyes red, filled with shame, and said quietly, "We'll fix this. But no more secrets. Not one more lie." He nodded. "And Vanessa?" She stood alone in the moonlight, arms folded over her belly, and for the first time she looked afraid. The next morning, Charleston woke under a gray curtain of clouds. Rain tapped against the windows as I stood at the kitchen sink, holding my mug with both hands like it was the only thing keeping me upright. I hadn't slept. Not really. I'd lain awake, reliving the conversation from the garden, Elias's confession echoing in my ears. The baby's not Brian's. It's mine. My husband Walter had been pretending to be unfaithful to protect our son. Our son had racked up thousands of dollars in gambling debt. And Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, was the spider at the center of it all, smiling sweetly as she spun lies around every one of us. The worst part? She almost succeeded. I had the truth now, but I needed proof. By mid-morning, Walter had gone out again this time to run errands. He'd kissed me on the cheek before leaving, lingering a moment longer than usual. There was something in his eyes that hadn't been there in weeks. Relief. We hadn't talked in full since the garden, but he knew I knew, and I think part of him was grateful. I waited until I heard his car turn off the street before I went upstairs. I didn't have a plan, not exactly. Just an instinct. A pull. I climbed the stairs to the guest bathroom that adjoined Brian's old room, the one Vanessa had claimed as her personal dressing space on her visits. I opened the door, half expecting everything to be spotless and empty. It was. Almost. There, behind the toilet, partially tucked into the baseboard, was a white envelope, slightly crumpled, like it had fallen from a purse in a rush. I stared at it for a long moment, my heart already pounding. Then I picked it up. The return address said Gene Tech Laboratories. My throat went dry. I slid the paper from the envelope carefully, unfolding the contents with trembling fingers, and there it was. Paternity test results. Mother, Vanessa Greer. Fetus, unborn, Samplavia amniocentesis. Alleged father number 1, Brian Ellison. Excluded, 0% probability. Alleged father number 2, Elias Moreno, not excluded, 99.7% probability. The page swam in front of me. It wasn't a suspicion anymore. It wasn't hearsay. It wasn't a maybe. It was fact. Vanessa had known the baby wasn't Brian's for weeks, possibly months, and she'd had the documentation to prove it. But instead of confessing, instead of stepping aside, she'd weaponized her secret, held it over Walter, manipulated us all. Why keep the proof then? Why not destroy it? Because she was clever. I had to give her that. She kept it as insurance, a way to rewrite the narrative if her game collapsed. I was a victim. Walter took advantage of me. I didn't know what to do. A lie for every audience. I sat down on the closed toilet lid, the paper shaking in my hands. This one sheet held the power to end everything. It could free Walter. It could break Brian's heart. It could ruin Elias's quiet life forever. I folded it slowly, slipping it into the inside pocket of my cardigan. From the hallway, I heard the unmistakable click of heels on hardwood. Vanessa! I stood, took a deep breath, and opened the door just as she reached for it. She blinked, startled, then smiled. "Oh, I didn't know you were up here." I was just checking the faucet," I said calmly. "It tends to stick." She nodded, eyes scanning my face like she was searching for cracks. "You look tense," she said, voice light. "Everything all right?" "Fine," I said. "Just tired." She leaned against the doorframe, all casual elegance. "You know, Martha, pregnancy changes everything. It makes you reevaluate what matters, what kind of legacy you want to leave, what kind of family you want to build." I watched her carefully. She was fishing. "Walter's been very kind to me," she continued. "Supportive. I'm not sure how I would have managed without him. All this stress, financial stuff. It's a lot for someone my age." She tilted her head. "Has he told you how much he's helped?" I said nothing. She took a step closer. "There are some things you wouldn't understand. The choices people make when they're scared. Or trapped. It's not always so black and white." I met her gaze. "Number. But some things are." She blinked. "You should get some rest," I said gently. "Stress isn't good for the baby." Her eyes narrowed slightly. Thank you, Martha. I smiled. You're welcome, dear. That night, I sat across from Walter in the study. He was nursing a glass of bourbon, staring at the fireplace even though we hadn't lit it. I laid the paper on the desk. He looked at it, read it, then leaned back and closed his eyes. She dropped it, I said. In the bathroom. His voice was barely a whisper. You know everything now. I nodded. I know she blackmailed you. I know Brian has a gambling problem. And I know this isn't your fault. He opened his eyes. I'm so sorry, Martha. I should have told you. I didn't want you to look at Brian the way you looked at your father. That hit me like a punch, because he was right. My father had been a gambler, a charming, careless man who lost everything. The house, the car, my childhood. And I'd spent decades pretending I wasn't still angry about it. Tears sprang to my eyes. Walter, I said softly, you should have trusted me with the truth. I know. He reached across the desk and took my hand. It was the first time in weeks we'd touched with intention. I want to fix this, I said. He looked at me, hopeful. How? We invite them over for dinner, I said. All of them. Sunday night. His eyebrows rose. You want a confrontation? No, I said, a smile tugging at my mouth. I want the truth, but I want it on our terms. He stared at me, then smiled. That's my girl. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. There's a certain kind of silence before a storm. Not the loud, ominous kind with thunder rumbling in the distance, but the still, almost reverent quiet that comes just before something breaks. That was what Sunday felt like. I spent the day cooking. Pot roast again. Just like last time. Homemade rolls, green bean casserole, Rachel's apple pie recipe scribbled on a note card I'd nearly thrown out years ago. The kitchen smelled like memory, like all the versions of motherhood I'd worn over the decades. Except this time, I wasn't making dinner to hold the family together. I was making it to set us free. Walter moved through the house like a man preparing for war, polishing the silverware, refolding the cloth napkins even though I'd already done it. But it wasn't nervousness I saw in him. It was resolve. We had talked through every angle, every possible reaction, every what if. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to accuse. I wasn't even going to raise my voice. Vanessa would expect drama. She would be ready for it. So we would give her something else entirely. They arrived just before 6. Brian came through the door first, arms full of flowers, his face glowing in that way that still broke my heart. These are for you, Mom, he said. Vanessa picked them out herself. Of course she did. Vanessa followed him in, glowing. That carefully curated glow of a woman who knows the light is about to fall on her. Her hand rested on her small bump like it was a trophy. Everything smells amazing, she said, kissing my cheek. I smiled. We're so glad you're here. We sat at the table, same seats, same china, same soft lighting. It was almost a perfect mirror of the first dinner. But something had shifted. I had. Vanessa chatted about baby names. Brian beamed. Walter made polite conversation about the garden. I passed the roast and filled glasses and nodded at all the right places. It wasn't until dessert that I made my move. You know, I said, slicing the pie, I've been thinking a lot about family history lately. About genetics. Vanessa's fork paused. Genetics? She echoed. I nodded, placing a slice in front of Brian. It's amazing how traits carry across generations. You have Walter's eyes, but my chin. And Brian, he had my dad's stubborn streak from the moment he was born. Brian laughed. Don't remind me. Vanessa smiled tightly. Genetics are full of surprises. Oh, yes, I agreed, pouring coffee. And these days, with technology being what it is, you can know so much. Not just ancestry parentage, too. Even before a baby is born. The air shifted. Brian kept smiling, but Vanessa's face went still. Her hand dropped from her belly. Walter cleared his throat softly. His cue. Martha, he said gently, didn't you find something recently? Something someone left behind? I stood up, walked to the sideboard, picked up the manila envelope, and brought it back to the table. Vanessa's eyes followed it like a hawk tracking prey. I believe this is yours, I said softly, placing it beside her plate. Brian looked confused. What's going on? Vanessa didn't touch it, so I opened it for her, pulled out the DNA results, and laid them flat on the table. Brian leaned forward. His eyes scanned the page. What is this? He asked, his voice already unsteady. This isn't... His voice faded. Vanessa, I said, do you want to explain? She didn't speak. Brian turned to her, his eyes wide with panic. This says I'm not the father, that the baby is... He stopped, looked at Walter, then at me. Who is Elias Moreno? He asked. Our gardener, I said. No, Vanessa whispered. No, that's not... Brian stood so quickly his chair fell backward. You lied to me, he said, shaking. All this time, the nursery plans, the names, you looked me in the face and... It wasn't supposed to happen, Vanessa said quickly, standing too. I didn't plan it. Elias, he was kind. I was lonely. Brian, you were always working and I... No, he said sharply. No, you don't get to make this about me. Walter stood, quietly. Brian, there's more you need to know. Vanessa's head snapped toward him. Don't! But he didn't stop. You've been gambling, Walter said gently. Online, sports betting, poker. Vanessa encouraged it. She got you into it. Then she used the debt to control me. Brian froze. What? She told me if I didn't help cover it up, Walter continued. She would ruin you. Tell everyone. Destroy your career. I pretended to be involved with her, to give her a story. Vanessa stared at him, speechless. Brian looked from his father to me, his face crumpling. I thought I was protecting you, Walter said. But I was wrong. I should have told you sooner. Brian's voice cracked. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything yet, I said, walking over. You just have to know this. We're not angry with you. We want to help you, but it starts with truth. For a long moment, the only sound was the quiet hum of the kitchen clock. Then Brian turned to Vanessa. You need to leave, he said. She blinked. What? I want you out of this house. Tonight. You can't just... I can, he said. And I am. She looked at me, searching for pity, but I had none left to give. You'll find a bag packed upstairs, I said. And a plane ticket. Phoenix. Elias's sister said she'll help you get on your feet. Vanessa's mouth opened, but no sound came out. You always liked having control, I said softly. Let's see what you do with your life when you can't control anyone else. She left without another word. Brian didn't speak for a long time after she was gone. He just sat there, staring at the cold pie, his hands shaking. Walter reached out, covering one with his own. We'll get through this, he said. Together. Brian looked at me, and for the first time in years, he didn't look like a grown man trying to impress us. He looked like our boy again. Okay, he whispered. Okay. The house felt quieter after she left, not just in sound but in spirit, as if something dark had finally been exhaled after lingering too long in the corners. Vanessa's suitcase had barely made it to the trunk before Brian closed the door behind her. He didn't watch her drive away. He just stood in the foyer, shoulders slumped, hands and fists at his sides, like he was holding something heavy and didn't know where to put it. Walter and I didn't speak. We let the silence settle. Eventually, Brian sat down on the bottom step of the staircase, elbows on knees, staring at the hardwood floor like it might offer answers. I didn't know, he said finally, his voice hoarse. I didn't see it. Walter sat across from him, quiet. I thought I was being responsible, Brian went on. Managing things. Work stress, the house, the loans. I thought if I just kept moving, I could outrun it all. You didn't have to outrun it alone, I said softly, joining them. He looked at me, his eyes bloodshot. I didn't want you to be ashamed of me. My chest tightened. I hadn't told him, not once in all his life, about the day I packed up my childhood home because my father bet away the mortgage. I never let Brian see what that kind of betrayal did to a girl. I didn't want him growing up under the shadow of someone else's failure. So instead, he lived in fear of becoming it. Shame doesn't come from mistakes, I told him. It comes from burying them. He nodded slowly. I need help, he whispered. Walter reached over, placed a steady hand on his back. You'll get it. We'll go together if you want. Brian exhaled. A broken sound. Half relief, half grief. I feel so stupid. You're not, I said. You're just human. And you're still ours. That night, we sat in the living room like we hadn't in years. No phones, no television, no distractions. Just the three of us. And the kind of silence that meant something different now. Brian stayed over. He slept in his old room. I passed by the door once before going to bed and saw him curled on his side, the light from the hallway casting soft shadows on the floor. For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be small, tender, tangled in his Star Wars sheets. In the kitchen, Walter poured us both a glass of wine. 2 quiet victories, he said. I raised my glass. And long roads home. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. In the days that followed, the healing began not loudly, but in small ways. Brian enrolled in a Gamblers Anonymous group in Mount Pleasant. Walter drove him to the first 2 meetings. On the third, Brian asked to go alone. He started cooking again simple things, like grilled cheese or scrambled eggs. He stayed busy, raking leaves, fixing a broken fence post. At night, I'd catch him in the backyard, just sitting, eyes on the stars. A week later, he handed me a letter. To Elias, he said. Can you give this to him? I opened it only after Brian nodded. It was short, heartfelt, an apology, an acknowledgement, a kind of truce. I mailed it the next day. We never heard back, but 3 weeks later, a package arrived from Phoenix. Inside was a photo. A baby boy with dark curls and eyes like Elias's. On the back, in neat handwriting, his name is Noah. Thank you for everything. I left the picture on the mantel. No anger, no bitterness, just peace. Autumn always carried a kind of melancholy with it. The way the light softened, the way the wind shifted, the way everything began to let go. This year, though, the melancholy felt different. Not bitter, but necessary. Like something had finally been laid to rest. It had been nearly a month since Vanessa left. The house was quieter now, but not empty. Just gentler, like we'd all started exhaling after holding our breath for too long. Walter was back in his garden. He spent his mornings pruning, watering, making plans for spring. Every now and then, I'd bring him lemonade or a slice of apple bread, and he'd look up at me with that old familiar smile, the one that used to come so easily before things got complicated. You thinking of replanting the rose beds? I asked one afternoon, watching him work. He wiped his brow with his sleeve. I was. But maybe I'll leave them as they are. Let them rest this year. I nodded. I understood. Sometimes, even the most faithful things need time to recover. That night, we shared dinner at the small breakfast table instead of the formal dining room. Just the 2 of us, like it had been before Brian grew up and life got loud. I missed this, I said, pouring us each a glass of sweet tea. Walter reached across the table, took my hand gently. I'm sorry for all the things I didn't say, he murmured, and the things I did, even if they were for the right reasons. I squeezed his fingers. We both did what we thought was best. He looked at me for a long time. You saved this family, Martha. I shook my head. I just refused to let it disappear. Brian came by every few days. Sometimes to mow the lawn, sometimes just to talk. He looked different now, less polished maybe, but more present. He'd started seeing a therapist, got rid of his online betting accounts, and even joined a local volunteering group. One afternoon, he brought over a pie. I made this, he said proudly, holding up the foil-wrapped dish. It's not as good as yours, but Rachel gave me the recipe. Rachel? I raised an eyebrow. He smiled, sheepish. She's from the group. Just a friend. For now. I didn't press. I just hugged him a little longer than usual. On Sunday, we sat on the porch, watching the sun melt behind the oak trees. Walter rocked slowly beside me, the wooden chair creaking with each motion. I rested my hand on the armrest between us. I was thinking, he said after a while, maybe we could take a trip. Just the two of us. Where? Doesn't matter. Somewhere with trees. Or mountains. Or no cell service. I laughed. So, the middle of nowhere? Exactly. We sat in easy silence for a while longer. And then I whispered, you know, for a long time, I thought growing older meant things would get simpler. Walter chuckled. Turns out, it just means the hard parts change shape. But we're still here. He nodded. Still here. And for the first time in a long time. I wasn't waiting for something else to fall apart. I was just grateful. For the cool evening air. For the man beside me. For the son who was still trying. For the life that, broken as it may have been, was still mine to hold. The first time I met Rachel, she brought muffins. Blueberry, still warm, wrapped in a linen towel with a navy ribbon tied around it. Not store-bought, not fussy, just thoughtful. Hi, Mrs. Ellison, she said, standing on my porch one Saturday morning. Brian says you love blueberries. I hope these aren't too sweet. Her voice was soft, unhurried. The kind of voice you could trust with a secret. I liked her immediately. She wasn't flashy like Vanessa had been. No designer sunglasses, no layered perfume, just jeans, a light sweater, and kindness written all over her face. Well, anyone who arrives bearing baked goods is already halfway to my heart, I said, stepping aside. She laughed a low, sincere laugh and followed me into the kitchen like she'd been there before in another life. Brian came in a few minutes later, carrying 2 coffees and looking slightly panicked. Mom, sorry I should have called. I didn't mean to ambush you. Relax, I said, smiling. She's lovely. And the muffins bought her 30 minutes. He exhaled, relieved, and Rachel just shook her head. I told him not to be so dramatic. We sat around the kitchen table, the 3 of us, chatting about everything and nothing books, autumn recipes, the best way to keep squirrels out of flower beds. It was easy in a way that family conversations hadn't been in a long time. And when they left, I stood in the doorway longer than I needed to, watching them walk to his car. He opened her door. She smiled at him like she knew his shadows and didn't mind them. And for the first time I let myself wonder if maybe something new could grow out of everything we'd lost. Over the next few weeks, Rachel became a quiet presence in our lives. Never pushing, never performing, just showing up with apple cider on chilly evenings, or soup when Brian had a cold, or flowers from her garden just because. One afternoon, I found her and Walter discussing soil acidity in the backyard like they were old friends. She knows her hydrangeas, he told me later with a shrug. That was his version of a stamp of approval. But Brian, he was more careful. There were days he seemed open, laughing easily, sharing old stories. And then there were days I saw the hesitation creep back in. Like he was afraid if he let himself be happy again, it might all fall apart. I don't know if I deserve this, he told me one evening, his voice raw. You don't earn love, I said. You just show up for it. Thanksgiving came fast that year. The leaves had mostly fallen, and the house was filled with the familiar smells of cinnamon and cloves. I was setting the table when Brian walked in, holding a little envelope. He handed it to me without a word. Inside was a photo. Rachel, laughing, holding a pie. Beside her, Brian, arms around her waist, smiling in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. On the back, in his handwriting, if you're okay with it, I'd like her to be here. I looked up at him. Of course, I said. I was hoping you'd ask. Thanksgiving morning arrived with a soft drizzle and the smell of brown sugar and cinnamon. I woke early, just as I always had, put on my oldest apron, tied my hair back, and let the rhythm of the kitchen carry me. There's a kind of comfort in routine, especially when everything else has changed. Walter peeled potatoes at the counter, humming under his breath. Brian was in charge of stuffing. I basted the turkey and lit candles in the window. And for the first time in years, no one was pretending. No one was hiding. The table was already set when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Rachel holding a pumpkin pie and a small bouquet of wildflowers. Happy Thanksgiving, Martha. Her smile was gentle, steady. I stepped aside. and she came in like she belonged because by now, she did. Dinner was simple, but perfect. The turkey wasn't dry. The rolls rose just right. The cranberry sauce didn't come from a can this year, which Walter made a show of pretending to miss. Brian sat beside Rachel, laughing at something she whispered under her breath. His hand rested near hers on the table, their pinkies touching barely but intentionally. There were no speeches, no grand toasts, just passing bowls, trading stories, and the kind of warmth that fills a house more than any fire ever could. At one point, I looked around and realized there was no ache in my chest, no waiting for the other shoe to drop. Just this, the clinking of silverware, the scent of rosemary, the sound of my family, slowly stitching itself whole again. After dinner, Rachel and I stood at the sink together, sleeves rolled up, hands deep in soapy water. "I'm glad you came," I said. She handed me a plate. I was nervous. I glanced at her. "Not because of you," she added quickly. "Just, it's hard walking into someone else's story, especially when the last chapter was messy." I nodded. "Well, you're helping us write a new one." She smiled. "That means a lot." We fell into a rhythm wash, rinse, dry our shoulders, bumping every now and then. Then she asked, "Do you ever miss it? The noise? The chaos?" I thought for a moment. I used to. But now, I think I just miss the people I was when the house was full. The version of me that didn't know heartbreak yet. She nodded. "But that version of you wouldn't have known how strong you really are." I looked at her. "You're good for him," I said. "I just try to show up. That's more than enough." That night, after everyone had gone, I stepped out onto the porch with a cup of tea. The air was crisp, the sky clear, stars scattered like promises not yet broken. Walter joined me, slipping his arm around my waist. "We did okay," he said. I leaned into him. "We're still doing okay." And in the quiet that followed, I whispered a little prayer not of request, but of thanks. Thanks for grace I didn't earn, for healing I didn't see coming, and for the beautiful, ordinary miracle of sitting at a table with people I love and not needing anything more. The first snow came quietly. No blizzards, no grand arrival, just a soft drift overnight, dusting the porch rail and blanketing the garden beds. Walter had finally stopped tending for the season. I woke up before the sun and wrapped myself in my thickest cardigan, the one with the frayed cuffs that Brian used to chew on as a toddler. The house was still, peaceful, but I couldn't sleep. Something had been tugging at me lately. A memory, maybe, or a question I hadn't finished asking myself. I made a cup of tea, then went up to the attic. It had been years since I'd been up there, years of meaning to sort things, but never quite having the heart. But that morning, I pulled down the ladder, climbed slowly into the dust and cedar smell, and started opening boxes. That's when I found it. A worn leather journal, tied with twine. My name was scribbled on the inside cover, along with the year, 1977, the year we got married. I sat down on an old trunk, cradling the book like it might break. And then I began to read. May 6, 1977. We danced in the living room tonight. No music, just Walter humming something soft. I stepped on his feet 3 times, but he didn't mind. Said clumsy feet were part of the package. I think I might love him forever. I smiled. I had forgotten that girl. Forgotten how hopeful she was. How sure. The 12th of October, 1980. Brian cried for 3 hours straight. I cried for 2. Walter brought home a milkshake and a pack of diapers, said he didn't know which I needed more. He's trying. We all are. I don't know if we're doing this right, but at least we're doing it together. I closed the book for a moment and let that version of us sit there with me in the cold attic. We didn't know then that we'd face addiction, or betrayal, or silence so heavy it nearly buried us. But we also didn't know that we'd survive it. Together. I spent the rest of the morning reading, laughing sometimes, crying often. The journal didn't fix anything, but it reminded me that the life we had built was real, even when it cracked. That love isn't something you feel once. It's something you choose, over and over, even when it's hard, especially then. That night, I brought the journal downstairs and placed it on the living room shelf, next to the family photo albums. Walter saw it and raised an eyebrow. Is that the one with the story about me dropping a whole meatloaf on the floor during our first Thanksgiving? It might be, I said, smiling. He chuckled. Good. We could use some reminding. Now and then. Oh. Later, I caught him flipping through it, glasses on the tip of his nose, laughing under his breath. Were we really this young? He asked. We were, I said. And somehow, we still are. The letter came in a plain white envelope. No fanfare, no warning. Just a return address from North Carolina and Brian's name typed neatly in the corner. He opened it while we were all sitting on the porch, the air still cool from an early spring wind. Rachel sat beside him, legs tucked under, a book forgotten in her lap. At first, I didn't notice the change in his face, but then I heard him exhale. Mom, he said, eyes scanning the page. It's from the recovery clinic in Asheville. They want me to apply for the outreach director role. I set down my teacup. That's wonderful. It's full-time, he added, voice low. With benefits. Housing stipend. They said Rachel could teach at the community college nearby. They want both of us. Walter looked over the top of his newspaper. Sounds like they've got good sense. Brian chuckled nervously. I didn't expect it. I didn't think I was ready. Rachel placed a hand on his. You are. I smiled, but something in my chest tightened. Not because I didn't want this for him, but because I did. More than anything. That night, I lay awake longer than usual. Walter slept peacefully beside me, breathing slow and deep, while my thoughts ran in quiet circles. I had spent so long praying for Brian to find his footing again. Now that he had, I found myself standing at a familiar crossroads, the kind only mothers know, where the love you give means letting someone go. I wasn't sad, not really, but I was aware suddenly, sharply, of how the house would sound without his laughter echoing down the hall, of how Rachel's muffins wouldn't be on the counter Sunday mornings, of how the kitchen table would return to just 2 chairs. I'd survived worse, but this was different. This was goodbye wrapped in hope. A week later, Brian came to me while I was trimming tulips in the garden. He looked unsure, which was rare these days. I don't want to leave you, he said. I wiped dirt from my gloves. You're not leaving me. You're just going forward. He nodded. It feels selfish. Son, I said gently, the most unselfish thing a child can do is live a good life. He looked down. You have something worth building, I added, and someone to build it with. Go. Be happy. We'll be fine. He stepped forward, pulled me into a hug. And for a moment, I didn't feel old. I just felt like his mom. On their last night in town, we had dinner together. Simple, warm, familiar. Brian asked if he could take one of the photo albums with him, the one with my 3rd grade science fair disaster. Rachel brought me a jar of her garden jam, tied with a label that read, "When you miss us, spread this on toast." We laughed. We cried. We promised too many things, but we meant them. The next morning, as their car backed out of the driveway, I stood at the porch with Walter's hand in mine. We waved until the taillights disappeared. Then we stood in the silence they left behind. Think they'll be all right? Walter asked. I nodded. They already are. And in my heart, I knew. Some doors don't close. They just lead somewhere new. The first morning without them felt still. Not sad, not aching, just still. I made coffee for 2, then remembered. Poured Walter's, poured mine. Left the other mug on the counter, untouched out of habit. The quiet in the house was different now. Not like after a fight or during grief, but like after a storm, when everything is finally calm again, even if the landscape has changed. Walter read the paper, glasses sliding down his nose, while I wandered into the craft room I hadn't stepped foot in for years. The sun filtered through the dusty blinds, painting golden lines across the sewing machine, the spools of thread, the boxes of half-finished quilts. I ran my fingers along the edge of the old rocking chair, remembering long nights spent there, rocking Brian through colic, stitching baby blankets I never had time to finish. I sat down, and I picked up a needle. A few days later, Ruth called. Thought I'd lost you to the Bermuda Triangle of motherhood, she teased. Just temporary exile, I replied. I'm back. Well then, you're officially on casserole duty for Tuesday's church group. I laughed. Same old Ruth. Someone's gotta keep you honest. And just like that, the rhythm returned. Not the same rhythm, but something new. I started walking again. Not far, just to the park at the end of the street. I watched squirrels chase each other through the dead leaves, nodded at the dog walkers, shared a bench with an old man who fed peanuts to blue jays from a tiny paper sack. Name's Harold, he told me one afternoon without turning. Martha, I replied. He nodded once. You come here a lot? Starting to. Good spot for thinking. I smiled. I've been doing plenty of that. We didn't say much more, and that was enough. Walter and I found new routines. Puzzles in the afternoon, classic radio shows in the evening. We argued about crosswords and laughed at each other's old people habits. I never thought we'd be boring, he said once, sipping his tea. We're not boring, I replied. We're peaceful. He considered it. Big difference, he said finally, and I believed him. One Sunday, I opened a letter from Brian. It wasn't long, just a few updates. He was settling in. Rachel had started a poetry group. He missed my cornbread. He was thinking about getting a dog. He ended with, I think I'm happy, Mom. Really happy. I held the letter to my chest for a moment. Not because I needed proof he was okay, but because it felt like the end of a chapter I didn't know I'd been writing for 35 years. And maybe now, finally, I could write one for myself. If you're still watching, comment one so I know you're still with me. It started with one sentence. I sat at the kitchen table one afternoon, rain tapping gently against the windows, and I picked up a pen more out of instinct than intention. And I wrote. I was never the loudest voice in the room, but I remember everything. I stared at the words. They didn't mean much yet, but they felt true. That night, I pulled out an old spiral notebook, the kind with coffee stains on the edges and a few pressed wildflowers still tucked inside from the garden 2 summers ago. I opened to a blank page, and I began. Not in order, not even well, just memories, fragments, bits of laughter, bits of ache. The first time I held Brian, and he wouldn't stop crying until I sang You Are My Sunshine 6 times in a row. The way Walter used to leave little notes in my coat pocket during winter when I worked the morning shift at the diner. The silent Christmas after my father died, when the only gift we gave each other was presents. The day Vanessa walked in and everything started to unravel, and how, even then, I had hoped I was wrong. And the quiet miracle of how, piece by piece, we put our family back together without raising our voices. I didn't write every day. Some days, I just sat there, fingers hovering over the pen, heart too full. But other days, the words poured out of me like I'd been holding them for decades. It wasn't about blame. It wasn't even about truth with a capital T. It was just about being seen, even if only by myself. Ruth caught me one morning, notebook in hand at the cafe. Memoir time, she teased, sipping her decaf. Just scribbles, I said. She raised an eyebrow. Your scribbles probably hold more wisdom than 1,000 blog posts and podcasts combined. I shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just finally listening to myself. She reached over and squeezed my wrist. Took you long enough. One evening, Brian called. We chatted about the weather, the new soup kitchen he'd volunteered at, and Rachel's students who'd started calling her Professor Sunshine. Just before we hung up, he asked, What have you been up to, Mom? I hesitated, then said, I've been writing. There was a pause. About what? Everything. He was quiet for a moment. Then I'd like to read it someday. You might, I said softly. But I think I'm writing it more for me than for anyone else. I'm glad, he replied. You deserve that. Later that night, I added one more sentence to the first page. Underneath the words, I was never the loudest voice in the room. But I remember everything. I wrote, and maybe that's where the real stories live, between the things we didn't shout, but carried anyway. Spring arrived quietly. No sudden blooms. No parades of daffodils. Just the gentle thaw of soil, the patient unfolding of buds, and the kind of light that lingers longer each evening, not bold, but certain. I rose each day with purpose, but no longer with urgency. I walked slower, spoke softer, and listened more. Walter had started building a birdhouse out back. Nothing fancy, just cedar wood and careful measurements. I watched from the kitchen window as he hummed to himself, pencil behind his ear, content. Then the call came. "We're coming next weekend," Brian said, a little breathless. "All three of us." "All three?" There was a pause. "I want you to meet him," he said. "Noah." "Oh, we?" I cleaned the house the way I used to when Brian was in middle school, not for perfection, but for welcome. Fresh linens on the bed, a small stuffed lamb on the pillow, apple cinnamon candles in the guest bathroom. Rachel stepped through the doorway first, then Brian, carrying a toddler with a head full of curls and wide, curious eyes. "This," he said, "is Noah." And for a second, I couldn't move. Not because I was afraid, but because some moments are so sacred, you forget how to breathe. Then Noah leaned forward, placed a chubby hand on my cheek, and giggled. "Hi," I whispered, tears already welling. "I've been waiting for you." That weekend passed in a blur of joy I didn't know I still had room for. Noah chased robins through the yard while Walter pretended not to be completely enchanted. Rachel and I sat on the porch, trading stories, watching the boys, one full-grown, one just beginning, explore the garden side by side. At night, we played board games. No one cheated. No one sulked. We laughed until our sides hurt. And when Sunday came, I found myself not mourning the goodbye, but marveling at the gift of the hello. Before they left, Brian hugged me long and tight. "You okay, Mom?" I nodded. Better than okay. He stepped back and pulled a small package from his coat pocket. "This is from Noah," he said, grinning. "Sort of." Inside was a handmade card toddler scribbles in blue crayon, a stick figure woman with curly hair and the word "Gamma" written crooked across the bottom. My first grandchild's first word for me. I held it to my chest and whispered, "He got it just right." Later, as Walter and I sat on the porch swing watching the taillights disappear once again, I turned to him. "We did all right, didn't we?" He looked at me. "No," he said. "We did more than all right." And I believed him. Because some stories don't end. They just begin again. I used to think restoration was a dramatic thing, like a ruined house being rebuilt, or a life shattered and stitched back together in one grand, sweeping gesture. But now I understand it better. Restoration, for most of us, doesn't come like thunder. It comes like light, soft, steady, almost unnoticed until suddenly, everything's brighter. These days, the house is quiet again. Not empty, just Keter. Softer. Walter hums while he tends to his tomatoes. I write in my journal every morning with a fresh cup of tea. The dogwood tree outside our window is beginning to bloom again, just like it always does, like it's never stopped believing in spring. And me? Well, I've started smiling at my reflection. Not because I look younger or prettier or anything particularly special, but because I recognize the woman staring back at me. She's been through some things, but she's still here. Some afternoons, I read aloud from my journal, not to anyone in particular, just to the silence, just to remind myself where I've been. And other times, I sit on the porch and watch the neighborhood kids ride their bikes, screaming and laughing and scraping their knees like life isn't heavy yet. Sometimes I envy them, but mostly, I'm glad I've lived long enough to know better. The scrapbook Rachel gave me now has its own shelf. Inside, photos of Noah's first haircut, a dried petal from Rachel's garden, one of Brian's corny Father's Day cards, and a scribbled note from him that simply says, "Thank you for never giving up on me." Every time I open it, I remember something my grandmother once told me. You don't have to shout to be strong. You don't have to be young to begin again. And she was right. Last Sunday, I sat beside Rachel during church, while Noah wiggled in her lap. The choir sang softly, and the pastor read from Psalm 23. When he reached, "He restores my soul," I felt something shift inside me. Not a revelation, More like an arrival. Like the part of me that had been waiting, holding its breath, carrying weight, clinging to what ifs finally let go. And what remained was simple peace. So if you're reading this, if your heart's been bruised by time, or grief, or family, I want to tell you something. It's not too late. Not for love. Not for forgiveness. Not for joy that comes without explanation. You don't have to be fixed to be whole. You just have to keep showing up. As for me, I'm not finished yet. There are still chapters to write, cookies to bake, stories to tell, and a little boy named Noah who thinks I'm magic because I can make a birdhouse out of popsicle sticks and glue. Maybe I am. Or maybe the magic was never about doing. Maybe it was about staying. Staying soft. Staying hopeful. Staying in love with a world that's broken and beautiful anyway. If this story touched something in you, a memory, a quiet ache, or a reminder of who you are, I'd love to hear about it. Someone out there might be walking the same road you've already survived. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and come back next week for another story that speaks to the soul. Because sometimes he restores your soul, not by changing your life, but by changing the way you see it.